Urist. Wow. I'm going to go with Urist Venyaran Eryuvanda. And if I'm wrong about that, my sincere apologies. Asked, I wouldn't do it myself because I know myself, but I've read that if one is successfully controlling an airplane in midair without an engine, it can be said that only then is truly flying. That's the glider thing I was just talking about. It's absolutely true. I mean, flying is something that man has wanted to do forever, and the Wright brothers developed power flight before gliding flight. That's an interesting thought, but it's true. We invented the airplane before we invented the glider. Now, some people say, well, Otto Lilienthal had a glider and the Wright brothers started on gliders. That's true, but these were not gliders in any sense of the word that we understand the term today. They were not hang gliders. They were just basically kites that you held on to. And in order to solve the problem of powered flight, they had to solve the problem of controlling the airplane. And so in a very real sense, we built the airplane before we built a workable glider, which seems counterintuitive, but it's pretty much true. Once we knew how to control an airplane with an engine in it, then we could take the engine out. And once we had that kind of control over an airplane, then we could actually do real gliding, which we call soaring. When you are at 2,000 feet in a glider and you pull the tow rope, the glider always releases the rope. It's never the tow plane's decision, it's the glider's decision. When you pull that release and that rope goes whoosh, bungees back towards the tow plane, you brake right and he brakes left to clear the rope. And you're at 2,000 feet. And then you can find yourself at 3,000 feet without an engine. It is a different level of feeling. It's a different sense of achievement, is a better word. It's more of an achievement. And I was certainly less than 20 hours. I might have had 15 hours, 12 hours. I released at 1,800 feet, and I got to 14,000 feet. And I flew for 8 hours without an engine. I went 186 miles, no engine. This is the difference between sailing and motorboating. I don't mean to disparage either motorboating or powered engine flying because I love them both. But basically, in a powerboat, if you can steer and if you can move a throttle, you can point the boat anywhere you want to go and get there. And it's kind of true for an airplane too. But I learned how to sail when I was 7 in a little lake, and the lake was like 7 boat lengths long. I mean, it was a tiny little lake. I had nothing to do, and it was a little sunfish, drop the centerboard, and I learned how to sail real early. But if you ever do learn how to sail, and you find yourself moving into the wind and getting someplace upwind, you have to zigzag a little bit. But when you realize, my God, man, I'm moving against the wind, and I am going to go from here to there, and I'm not going to spend any energy to do it. It's a big difference in going. There's a big difference in sailing. And for those people who have sailed, if you want to know what soaring is like, it's just sailing in 3 dimensions. It's an intuitive sense of the environment. You become one with these forces of wind, and in the case of soaring, lift, and you are aware of what the air is doing. Most pilots in their powered airplanes are aware of what their airplane is doing, but a soaring pilot, a glider pilot, has to be aware not only what his glider is doing, but he also has to be aware of what the air is doing. Is the air rising? Is it descending? Air masses move up or down. They move sideways with the wind, but they also move up or down based on how hot they are, or whether mountains are deflecting them upwards, or whatever the case may be. Just real quick on the soaring thing, so many things that people just don't think about. And I didn't think about them either. It's not a problem. It's just most people don't think about this. People want to know, well, a thermal. What's a thermal? What's a thermal look like? What's it feel like? And I was trying to explain this, and I realized, what's the matter with me? Every single one of you has seen 100,000 thermals with your own eyes. You know exactly what a thermal looks like and how it behaves, because every time you've seen a puffy cumulus cloud, you're looking at a thermal. And this is one of the things nobody ever thinks about. You go out on a cloudy day, most people don't ever have this perception, but all the clouds are at the same altitude. The bottoms of the clouds are at the same altitude. You don't see big puffy clouds one way up here and one way down here. They're all at the same level. Sometimes you will see different levels of clouds, but all of the clouds on those levels will be on the same level with each other. There might be a high level of stratus and puffy clouds down low and real wispy clouds up high. But no one thinks about this. You think of clouds as being in the air, and they are, but they're not in 3 dimensions in the air. They're in 2 dimensions. They're on the same plane. And that's because of the definition of what a cloud is. By the way, just a regular puffy cumulus cloud, I think, weighs more than 100 elephants. That's the actual weight of the water. So when people think, well, how can a glider stay up there because it's so heavy? A glider weighs 700 pounds. The amount of, anybody who's ever carried a bucket of water knows water is heavy, and the amount of water in a typical cumulus cloud is thousands and thousands of pounds of water, and it's put up there by energy. The reason I say you've seen a thermal before is this. Out in the desert where it's very dry, the sun heats the ground, and this air starts to rise, and it's like a lava light. The bubble of hot air starts to ascend into the sky, and since it's the desert and where there's no moisture, it's invisible, and you have to circle and find it. You have to feel it, and you have to kind of come back to where you thought it was and get in the middle of it, and up you go. But the reason I suddenly realize is everybody's seen a thermal is because if you have enough moisture in the air, then what happens is the air gets heated just like in the desert, and this bubble of air starts to rise just like in the desert. But if there's enough moisture in the air, here's what happens. The air cools down, and it cools down at a known rate. It's about 3 degrees Fahrenheit per 1,000 feet. It's called the adiabatic lapse rate. And as this air starts to rise, the surrounding air gets cooler, and the higher it goes, the colder it gets. And water will condense as it gets colder. That's why water condenses on the side of a Coke can that's been in the freezer, for example. The colder it is, the less the air can sustain the water vapor, so it condenses out into water. So the reason you've all seen a thermal is, as this thermal goes up, the air around it gets cooler and cooler and cooler, and when it reaches the condensation point, it becomes visible. That's why the bottom of a cloud, a growing cloud anyway, is flat. It's not flat because clouds are built flat. It's flat because that is the temperature gradient at which the condensation is occurring. Anything above that point is going to be cold enough to be condensed and visible. Anything below that point is too warm for it to condense, and so it's invisible. But this rising water vapor is invisible, 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 hits that temperature where it condenses, and suddenly it becomes a visible white cloud, and it continues to grow and grow and grow, and the more above that condensation point, the more visible it becomes. You can see it growing and expanding, and eventually just kind of dissolves out and fades out. If air is rising, it's got to descend somewhere. The atmosphere has only got so much air in it, so a little pocket of rising air eventually disperses, and it creates a much larger area of descending air. And when you can see it in terms of a puffy cloud, it's pretty clear. A growing cloud is very sharp-edged. You look at the top of a cumulus cloud, it's almost like you drew it with a razor. It's really sharp. But as it gets older and as the energy dissipates, the cloud starts to dissipate and everything starts to get blurry as it comes back down again. So this is why in a glider you've got to keep your wits about you, or if you want to go any distance, because even though it may not be visible, it's happening. Air's going up in a small area, and it's coming down in a wider area. It's going up fast in a small area, and it's coming down slowly in a wider area. So what you have to do is you have to find those areas of rising air in these thermals and stay there. And you ride it as high as it'll go. As high as you can go. When it runs out of energy, it's time to move on. Now when you move on, let's say you just want to go from here to Vegas or whatever. I'm going to start heading to Vegas. Now I'm descending through the air, which is how we fly. So gravity's keeping us moving forward. But in many cases, I'm descending through air that is also going down. The air itself is going down. So paradoxically, if we're in rising air, we want to fly very slowly. If we're in descending air, we want to ride faster. So the big paradox is when you're leaving a thermal trying to find your next thermal along your route, you actually have to put the nose down and go even faster down, which is not what you want to do. You don't want to go down, but you have to get out of that descending air quickly. You don't want to spend a lot of time in air that's going down. You want to spend as little time as possible. So you put the nose down even more, and you take the altitude hit, and you penetrate through that descending air, and then you find another patch of rising air, and you ride that sucker up, and off you go. If you look at the bottom of a cloud is a great place to be. I've been In the desert, there's so much energy, there's so much solar energy heating the ground in the desert that some of these thermals can be very powerful. And while there's a few months out of the year in the desert where the moisture and the temperature are correct, because in the winter there's not enough energy to kick these thermals off. It's just too cold, not enough thermal energy on the ground. In the summertime, it's going like crazy, but it's so dry you can't see anything. But in the spring and the fall, there's a couple of months there where there's enough moisture and enough lift for you have the magic of clouds, which is a real showstopper for those of us who live out in California. Clouds are, wow, in Florida, there are clouds all the time because they are so moist. Anyway, my point is, when we would start to see in the desert, if we would start to see a cloud developing, just the first wisps of a cumulus cloud, we'd fly there in a heartbeat, and we'd stay right there, and sure enough, whoosh, up you go. And as the day continues, these clouds get bigger and bigger and bigger. And many times in the desert, we would say the day overdeveloped. And what we would mean by that is, as the clouds continue to grow, more air is brought in, and this air goes up too. And eventually, you can get so much lift and so much clouds that the clouds are cooling the surface, and then you don't get lift anymore. The day is overdeveloped. Well, you were talking earlier, question on have I ever been scared? I haven't been scared in the air except for one time when I didn't have confidence in the airplane. But one of the most alarmed I've been, this is going to be hard for you to believe. I was in a 2-seat glider, and we were underneath the cloud deck out in a cumulus cloud out in the middle of the desert. And we were going up like gangbusters. And man, if you're looking for altitude, free altitude, it's woohoo! And the thing is pegged. You're doing 20 knots up, 2,000 feet per minute climb rate with no engine. We're just going up. The glider's coming down all the time, but it's coming down through air that's going up really fast underneath this cloud. And as we started to get up closer and closer to the deck of the cloud, that lift just kept going. And so we said, okay, well, this is enough. And we put the nose down to fly out of there. No, we're still going up. And now we got the nose down at a pretty aggressive angle. I've got my flight instructor in the back, fortunately. And he's basically showing me this. He says, you got to be careful under here, because a glider is such an efficient flyer that if you're not real careful, this thing will pull you up into the cloud. Now, if it pulls you into the cloud, you might be in real trouble. There have been stories of guys in gliders who've been sucked up into a big cumulus cloud and ejected out of the top at 60,000 feet, 30,000, 40,000 feet, suffocated due to lack of oxygen, and probably frozen solid as well, because it's 60 degrees below zero up there. I have been in a glider where I've been going up so fast that I was actually quite alarmed. And I had to put the nose down and pull the speed brakes out to make the wings work a lot less efficiently. Just, holy crap, we're getting sucked up into this thing. That's not something you have an experience of every day. But that kind of lift is amazing. And then there's a kind of lift called ridge lift where the air hits this works in the winter. Air is much smoother in the winter because it's denser, because it's colder. But if the wind is blowing and it hits a mountain range, that air has to go someplace, and it goes up. The air pressure from the mountain forces that lift to go up. And that's why you see these wave clouds or these lens-shaped lenticular clouds. But underneath that lift is an area called rotor, and it's incredibly turbulent. And I flew through rotor with my flight instructor, and we're like flying along, and all of a sudden, it's like we hit a speed. I was like, crack! It wasn't like a bounce. It was just like, pow! Oh, man. The living crap beat out of us. And then you got to the other side, and it's like suddenly somebody just picked up the airplane and put it on ice. And there's no turbulence. There's no sense of moving through the air. It's just like ice. And you're going up like gangbusters, and the plane flies like a dream. There's no vibration. There's no turbulence. There's nothing. It's just because you're in this linear flow now. And those guys, their plans for glider pilots to go to the stratosphere, they're going to go to 80,000 feet. They're going to go 2-3 times higher than a jet flies without an engine using mountain waves. So it can be exciting out there.